Hey everyone, I'm Lester Martin, your dev advocate here at Datavolo. Today I want to walk you through a tutorial I have about persisting documents to Snowflake Stages. Those instructions are going to be up on our Dev Center, and the widget you're looking for is right here, Persist Docs in Snowflake Stages. About 14 minutes long. Most of that is some setup. Now, for this video, I'll do a lot of the setup quickly to make sure you can do that on your own and focus on the most exciting parts toward the end. The real gist here is we're trying to make sure that in your pipelines of that involve unstructured docs, that you might have an opportunity to save those somewhere. In this case, Snowflake programmers that are trying to build a flow in that world, surely Snowflake stages make a whole lot of sense. And to get set up, you just need a Datavolo cloud. These are Datavolo exclusive components. They will not work in basic open source Apache 95. And you have been able to do some kind of flow development. The rest is really making sure you have access over here to the Snowflake UI. A few other things once we're there, we want to make sure that you can create or have access to a stage, have a user with appropriate permissions, those kinds of activities. So we'll make sure you have that. After that, the first big step is just kind of download a flow file definition I have available. You'll pull that down and you'll make a drag and drop your process group, select that JSON file, and you'll get this Snowflake Stages tutorial, which, according to the instructions, says you ought to see something similar to that. Mine looks slightly different because I went ahead and right-clicked and said enable all controller services, which then allows us to make sure that first one, list S3, is ready to run. Now, this is a flow that's actually in another tutorial. If you're interested, it's called the NiFi doc ingest egress with S3. That will work on any NiFi instance. Those processes are purely open source. If you like to check it out and do those steps yourself, you can, or just jump on and know that we can have a flow that grabs some data. From here, we want to go over to Snowflake and make sure we have a Snowflake stage set up. So I tell you in the instructions to drill down to your data and either create or find your database and create or find your schema. I'm going to use LMDB, Lester Martin, DB, Lester Martin schema. And then here in stages, I went ahead and created one. You can just use that create button over there, which is in fact what I'm telling you to do here. So log in, identify your schema, possibly use the create stage Snowflake manage. And if so, call it something. I call mine tutorial and just left some basic settings here. So we can see that right there, stages tutorial. Now, when I click on tutorial and just make sure refresh, there's nothing here. And that's what the instructions should say. No files, etc. I do walk you through a few more things that you'll need to set up our processors, which is a warehouse. This is just the kind of place you're going to connect to, as well as a user that has access to that warehouse, access to that stage. You'll be able to write. So there's some permissioning and setup you'll have to do on your own. Mine is pretty wide open. It's a testing environment. I've given myself kind of account admin rights to everything. You may want to be a little bit more selective in what you do that. And then lastly, as it said in the very, very beginning, those users need to use key pair authentication, or at least the way I'm going to do it in the tutorial. There are other authorization approaches and options, etc. So I'm going to use those, and you see them screenshotted here. All right. What I did next, it says, hey, let's go and then let's build a couple controller services. So those that know a lot about NiFi, you know that usually you find out what controller services you need when you add your processor and it says, tell me the name of the controller service. So you kind of usually do that, but in these tutorials, I often simply say, let's just go set them up. So I went to controller services. The flow definition you imported already had this AWS one, so it's already there. It's already off and running. And then my instructions walk you through setting up a couple of them. One of them, a standard private key service. That's just this guy right here. If I took a little look at that, and if you looked at there, really the instructions are going to tell you to paste in your private key and your password used to create that private key. So that's stuff you had to do. You have to set that up. If you need to do that, it'll take a few minutes, but it's pretty straightforward, well documented on Snowflake's documentation site. From there, what I would always make sure you do on these connect controller services is not when they're running, they're enabled. When they're disabled, there's a button here that you can push, and you'll see here a validation. It'll let you know that everything checks out. It actually can do, if it actually makes a connection or validates something, it'll verify that. And I'd rather know now than later in a processor. All right, so we got that one set up, and then we make you set up a Snowflake connection service. Kind of obvious there, something that's going to connect there. And I walk you through what to set up. Basically, you're going to say use key pair authentication. You're going to have to pass it, write in your account, your Snowflake account, your user that you have set up that has credentials, and then reference that private key. So that's basically what you see here. And then toward the bottom, I tell you, you don't have to, they're optional. Warehouse, database name, schema. I went ahead and put them here just like my notes say, because I wanted to just set it up once and then reuse those values if I had more than one processor. But you can mix and match this. I'll talk about that in the setup processor just a minute. Absolutely do the verification, especially on this one. It'll validate everything. It'll validate the key service, the key controller service works, and everybody all checks and balances. And then make sure before you leave before you go back to the process group, make sure everything's enabled. These are just point enable, disable, that kind of thing. All right, so we have in places the flow that we were given, a couple controller services, really one, and then a subsequent one that is needed to help with the private key to make a connection to Snowflake. And we went ahead and told it lots of details like which stage and et cetera what to do. Now it gets kind of easy. The rest of this is nothing. We're going to add a processor and wire it up and run it. So let's do it. So add the processor. We're going to drag and drop. And I'm going to look for something like well, if I can put my finger, Snowflake internal. There it is. Snowflake, put Snowflake internal stage file. Perfect. And then I'm going to tell you to go ahead and just wire up the fetch, the success. These are the instructions in the notes there. Wire that guy up. And then just for testing purposes, I'm going to go ahead and just add two quick funnels here. 1, 2, and then I'm just going to drag and drop the connections for success. We really don't need to do that, but we want an easy way for debugging to look at it all. And then just in case something goes wrong, failure. And then my note said, hey, look, everything's ready to run, but this still has some problems. It still has to know about some configurations. Let's double check and make sure, yep, that's where we are. So let's configure that processor. Pretty easy. The old double click drops you right into the properties. And then the instructions are going to tell you, hey, pick the connection service we already declared. Boom, that's easy breezy. What kind of stage are we talking about here? We're going to use a named stage. I'm not going to describe the different types, but that's a very popular one. That's usually the one we're thinking about. And then here we could put a database and schema that would override what we put over earlier in the controller service, or if we left it blank, we could still override it, or the user has the default. There's lots of ways to do that, but definitely let's put the name of the stage that we created. I believe I called it a tutorial. The rest is that's all we have to do. The rest, the file name, all that stuff's happening for us from the flow itself. So let's make sure we're where we want to be. Yep, those 3 settings, quick snapshot. So setting up the processor once the controller service was ready was easy breezy. And then really we want to just make sure we start up those first 2 processors and see that the information is making it. So I'm going to hit start here, refresh, make sure a couple things. Yep, I'll start this one. And from here, I'll do a quick refresh. And when I'm showing you, it says, hey, you should see 4 flow files here. And then additionally, it says, why don't we look a little deeper into the queue? We will do that. List the queue. And this queue, those 4 flow files, each one of them references a PDF. And again, that's from the earlier in the flow, the stuff I gave you. And they're various sizes, not very big, because a couple megs just for a quick test, etc. And then from there, why don't we go ahead and run the actual processor and see what happens? So kick off the processor, start, wait a second or two here, maybe do a quick refresh. Oh, one of them made it. Let's see if the rest are there. 3 and there, they're all there. So all 4 of them made it. I go ahead and tell you, just to be a good person, go ahead and delete that queue, but we can We can do that later in a second, and then really just verify that it all made it. So I'm going to go back to my tutorial stages that you see right here. I'm going to hit a big refresh, and I'm going to cross my fingers, and voila, there are all four of those files. Or to have a little fun, it's alive. We actually did everything we're hoping to do. So that was my tutorial, short and sweet, as it should be. We're moving files to some type of internal private object store on Snowflake, and you use the processor, the single processor you needed that put Snowflake stage file, and basically a Snowflake connection controller services to get there. So feel free to click on some of these additional tutorials and know that I had a great time putting this together, and I hope you had an even better time exercising it. All right, for now, ciao, ciao.